Welcome to the Cardi Gallery. My name is Joe Placa. I'm the senior director here. We have two galleries, one here in London, another in Milan, and we're very to be hosting what is 6 decades of Paul's work. Piero helped the curator of the show. He's worked with Paul long before us. So I'm going to, Piero's been, how many shows have we done together?
Almost 10.
Almost 10 shows, 10 shows. Yeah.
You're in Milan.
You're in Milan, yeah. So he's family, is what we want to say. So I'm going to let Piero start and give a little introduction, and we'll have a little chat, and then after we'll have some time for some questions.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for being here, for giving us this wonderful exhibition that I hope you've all had a chance to see, and if not, I would encourage you to do so. It spans 3 floors. As Joe said, these plays, as well as the gallery in Milan, do feel a little bit like home. Nicola, the founder of the gallery and the heir to the 50-year-long history of this gallery, has been a close friend for over a decade, and we started working together in 2017 with a solo exhibition in Milan, and then this one here, and then it's been a back and forth between here and Milan, and also online during the pandemic. And so this is the last in a series of 10 exhibitions, effectively, in which we spotlight important historical figures with generally a focus on Italian art and American art, and this is the first time that we do together a solo show of a British artist. And what a great artist to do this with. Paul is a master, someone that not only had left a lasting mark in the history of British art, contemporary art in general, but also a great teacher, someone who has devoted a great deal of time and many decades to teaching newer generations of artists through especially at the Royal College of Art, but also other institutions. And so we will be doing an excursus of this wonderful 6 years of career. I should say, starting by what is around us. This floor is focused exclusively on paintings from the 1960s. Paul began painting a little bit as an abstract expressionist, we could say, with works that resemble, just to give you an idea, something like Franz Klein, for those of you familiar with American abstract expressionism, but then veered towards a research that was more focused on color and on harder edges and eventually geometry. The oldest painting in this room is from 1963, that orange work over there, the same year as a very important landmark book came out by Josef Albers, The Interaction of Color. And so this is something that I would like you to touch upon. Also, there are works from 1964, and then we go all the way to 1967. During those 4 short years, several important things happened in the art world. There was a development towards pop art in this country and in the United States, but also the birth of what we have then come to know as minimalism, and some seminal essays by Donald Judd, for example, such as Local History and Specific Objects. And in Paul's work, we really see all these influences. He was part of what we know as the new generation, out of this famous exhibition at the Whitechapel Gallery in 1964, and he was defined as the most important artist of that generation when he was then recommended for the scholarship that took him to the United States. And therefore, he was right in the middle of all these developments on both sides of the Atlantic, which is why I think it will be so thrilling to hear from him how all of this came together in his work. Please.
Okay. Was that a question?
It was an introduction.
I'll tell you what I really loved, because, I mean, as I just came back from New York yesterday,
Your hometown?
my hometown, if you didn't notice. There was a big sort of critical battle between Harold Rosenberg and Clement Greenberg. And I know that you were somehow...
Red Mountain and Green Mountain.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe you can speak a little bit about the context, because one was, of course, involved with action painting, and then the other was involved with formalism. So how did that play out in your work, and how did you react towards it? Or
Great writers, when writers still mattered, and like had these battles.
Well, going to New York when I was pretty young, really, and didn't know much, but I had a great magnetic attraction towards the American art that I'd seen exhibited in London. And also, at the time, I'd begun to meet one or two artists who had travelled to London for one reason or another, perhaps exhibitions and so on. And I thought it was very thrilling to turn what was a sort of fantasy world, which for me was New York and America, because I didn't know many people who'd been there and come back again to tell
to tell the tale.
It was such a rift between the two,
Yeah.
because of the cost of travelling and the rarity of being able to make that journey. And so my experience was very coloured with who I met, who I knew, got to know a bit more closely, and no doubt also the ones I didn't meet. I met Greenberg on a number of occasions, and he came to my studio. I never met Rosenberg. I don't know how long he lived, but I guess he was alive then and
he was.
kicking. But I never came across him. I think Greenberg was kind of more, had his finger on the pulse amongst younger generations.
Completely. And in a way, and as an advocate of your work, of course, because it somehow was
He
closer.
wasn't an advocate of my work.
It wasn't?
No.
Oh, what happened?
We didn't see eye to eye.
Amazing.
He came to
Oh.
my studio. He came to my exhibition at the Cardi Gallery. I don't think he came to both. I had two exhibitions in New York at the Cardi Gallery. And he liked, if he came across, especially I think an artist who was a little younger than most and maybe looked impressionable, he liked to think that he could take control of them.
Oh.
And he was a great advocate of cropping. That was one of his words.
Cropping?
Yeah. For instance, when he came to my studio, he'd shut one eye and hold up his hand, but more often his hat, which I thought was the most inappropriate shape. Because he was saying, so why don't you crop that half off the painting?
And how did you react to that? This critic comes and says, why don't you cut your painting in
I
half?
was too in awe of him to kind of pick an argument, but I sort of made it clear that my answer was no thanks. So
No.
I meant it to be there. And why are you in? Why
So
are
he
you
didn't take
suggesting
control of
change?
you. He didn't
He
take
did
control.
not take control of me.
Good,
He
good.
didn't exhibit any sense that I would like him to guide me.
Yeah.
But he did have a coterie of artists around him.
Yeah.
As you know, he...
Well, Helen Frankenthaler would be a great example of cropping, right? Of cropping. Do this massive painting and
I
then
knew
cut it out.
Helen very well and her husband, Robert Motherwell. They were very kind to me. Robert Bob gave me a reference that helped me get a Harkness Fellowship and a return trip to New York and to live there and work there for 2 years. And that was very, very valuable.
So your first trip to New York was the result of your meeting with Brian Robinson, wasn't it?
Correct.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, he came to my studio. I had my first exhibition at the Rowan Gallery, and he missed seeing that. And a mutual friend encouraged him to come to my studio. And am I not being heard? Should I speak more into this? And so he called me up and came round to the studio and immediately responded very positively to my work and asked me, I think on that first day, to be in the show he was organising called The New Generation, which was a real bombshell for me to have.
Well, for everyone.
A response from such an eminent curator and museum director, but also somebody who seemed to understand the work so immediately and felt a communication with it. So
He didn't tell you to crop any paintings, did he?
no.
No.
And no, he liked them a lot, and he was a big man at the time because he was a big wheel in London. And the Whitechapel Art Gallery was doing more things than the Arts Council and the Tate Gallery put together. And it was a destination place. I mean, it did help that it was next door to a tube station, but otherwise nobody from the centre of London and the west of London tended to travel to Whitechapel, but he put it on the map, and it was a place we all wanted to go to see the next exhibition he curated.
It was kind of like PS1 in the 80s or something like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And had a lot of wonderful shows, especially of the American artists, but not exclusively so. Anyway, I'm being long-winded.
No, it's great. Super interesting.
And he kind of took me under his wing. When I won the award there, which was there was several awards given at that exhibition, and I had a more generous one that was meant to give the recipients a trip to America, which is what I really wanted.
Yeah.
And I went, and it was a summer of discovery for me, and resonates in my life even today because of the people I met and the studios I went to. And
Whose studio did you go to first?
Mark Roscoe, Robert Motherwell, Helen Frankenthaler, Lee Krasner.
Is that all?
You were staying at Motherwell's, and
I was what?
were you not staying with Motherwell? And
Yes.
you were staying with them. How did
Briefly.
that? Briefly. So you had met them before, or
Yeah, they came to my studio, if you can call it that. It was the largest room in a sort of semi-detached Edwardian house that I could grab hold of, and that was where I worked. And they came to visit, the two of them came to visit me in the studio. And I don't want to repeat his name too often through this discussion, but I would say the majority of the things that happened to me in America were due to Brian Robertson, because he pushed me. I was not a very outward-going person, and he pushed me to meet people, and that was very valuable.
And in that show you got the first prize, didn't you?
Yes.
Don't be modest. You got the first prize.
Yeah.
And so it's worth reminding ourselves that in that show we also had David Hockney. We also had major figures that we all know about today. Moyland, etc.
Bridget Riley.
But Bridget Riley,
Yeah.
and you were picked out as the #1 of that
Yes.
entire lot
Yes.
to allow you to go to America. So this is not an insignificant detail, I would say.
No, it's true. So Greenberg we were on, weren't we? And I mentioned the sort of coterie of artists he had around him. But in slightly previous years, he claimed to be the great discoverer of Jackson Pollock, which is a signal of the kind of man that he was.
Yeah.
I hate to speak ill of the dead, but he was quite an arrogant guy.
Yeah, so I've heard many similar opinions. But he could at least tell him how to crop the painting, right? Especially.
Exactly did. I have a rather strange take on this attitude towards cropping, because basically the artists he befriended and had a big influence on painted very freely, spilling paint usually on canvas on the floor in the traditional Jackson Pollock, who was the guy who, on the whole, was the inventor of that technique and followed a great deal, somewhat by Frankenthaler and
What
many
about
others.
Prunes? Was he around, Larry?
Yes, it was,
Yeah.
he was one of Greenberg's
Yeah.
boys.
Yeah.
But so they used to make these huge canvases with spilt and dribbled and splashed paint. And then, so far as I understood it, I didn't ever take part in this, of course. They would have a meeting after half a dozen paintings were made, the fellow artists and Greenberg, and they look at the work on the floor and roll it up back and look at another one, roll it back. And Greenberg, leading the discussion, would crop.
Yeah. This section
this
looks
better.
good. Yeah.
This
Wow, imagine the
This is
power.
interesting.
I always, I don't know if I said this to him. If I did, it was the thing that put my foot in it. I thought it was like photography, because with photography, you
Yeah,
know,
that's true.
there's nature all around you, and you look through a viewfinder,
Yeah.
don't you? And you
Yeah.
you
The enlarger.
you make your composition, you select it,
Yeah.
and even then,
Then you
have
cut
the,
again.
you have the opportunity to crop again.
Yeah.
And that kind of seemed to me that the splashes and the dribbles were kind of nature to him.
Yeah.
He was framing it
Yeah, I get that. But you went completely the other way.
Yes.
Now, what made you go the other way?
As Piero said, in my earliest years, I was a kind of baby abstract expressionist, and I did make works very much along the lines of Franz Klein and some of the other American artists. And I kind of, it wasn't original of me. As American art of that period hit London, plenty of young artists were doing that kind of thing.
That's
It was not unusual. But I felt I'd gone through that as a necessary release to and the exploration of working in a very different way from working figuratively. It was my entree into abstract painting as much as it was my entree into expressionism. I think I'm not at heart an expressionist, though.
I would say no. You know? But what was the turning point? What was the moment where you divorced yourself from this?
I can tell you that because I was trying, most of my work at that period of splashing around and making gestural marks
Yeah.
were in black and white and on paper.
Yeah.
And then I was trying to find a way of adapting that into larger scale coloured works on canvas. And I found that much more difficult because black and white on paper is a little bit like making calligraphy, but not in such an elegant manner as the real.
Which is how I interpreted those pieces.
Yeah.
That for me, they looked like they had almost
There
a
is a
Japanese
strong relationship
Yeah.
with, I mean, also the idea of cropping. You know, some Gutai artists did that themselves without an external critic.
Yes.
Shimamoto, for example, which was one of our collaborations, he would make this great canvases in action, and then after he would go and cut.
Or Sirocco, who
canvases
painted
out of
with
that.
his feet. Sirocco painted with his feet.
I'm less familiar with the exact process of Shiraga, apart from the feet and the brooms and everything else.
Oh, right.
But yeah, but definitely with Shimamoto, I can confirm that there were these very large surfaces that then were cropped into multiple works.
Yes.
And calligraphy definitely has an element in much abstract expressionism in coming all towards
Mark
this.
Toby.
Is that Mark Toby?
Absolutely.
Chiefly, and in your chance artists
Also.
in Europe, you know.
But you were saying, what was, so
Well, expressionism and abstract expressionism, especially the more physical aspect of it, Pollock and de Kooning and so on, are to do with making rapid and gestural marks. And I found that I wanted to slow things down. A bit like today, we recently had talk and a bit of a fashion about people who said, okay, we've had fast food, now let's have slow food. Let's cook slowly and carefully. And that was before the years I'm talking about, but I sort of thought that about painting. I thought, well, I can make splashing marks like the next person, but how about painting them carefully and slowly, putting the brakes on? And there was one particular work, I was terrible in those days about titles, I still am, but it has a number, and I ended up not giving paintings numbers in the end because I got confused myself as to which was which.
267.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Which one was that?
Anyway, I made one, which happened to be one that was on my wall and had recently finished when Bob Motherwell visited my home and studio, and it did seem to interest me. I mean, these guys, they were big-time artists, and I was humbled by them, so I couldn't have expected them to really be interested, but they were polite, and they were kind to me.
I'm sure they were genuine. Robert Motherwell didn't suffer fools. I mean,
No,
yeah.
they were very, very generous spirited, and so he had a good look at it. Actually, that painting was sold to a doctor who had it for a number of years, and when he died, he bequeathed it to the Fitzwilliam Museum.
Is that in the book, by the way?
It probably is.
Yeah.
I can't remember.
Yeah.
It's a dark painting in dark maroon colours, dark reds, and hovering amongst between these two dark reds was a sort of diamond shape, which was something I used to.
Yeah. I was looking at that just let's have everybody have a look at that because it's important. Look at that. I mean, this is at a time when gestural painting, action painting, the canvas as an arena that recorded the artist's gestures. And he does this. Look at that. It's amazing.
It doesn't look as good as I remember it. I thought that
British modesty, I tell you.
I thought that green should have been more.
Yeah.
That green.
Yeah, okay.
That's how I
That's reproduction. I'm sure the painting. Okay, great. So that's
it's like
interesting.
a slasher paint crossing out this framework,
Yeah.
destroying it.
Right.
But the contour of it and the blob after it was carefully painted.
I
It
see.
derived from a real gesture.
Right.
And I have to say, to my credit, I did it before Lichtenstein, Roy Lichtenstein, who did pop art version of brush marks.
He did? Yeah.
He did that a couple of years later.
Those are kind of comic book.
I was there
That's
first.
more, yeah.
And then from then onwards, I got on to paintings like this orange one here.
Yeah.
So
So this is from the Fluid series.
That's what I call this,
The Fluid series. But here,
it kind of existed, I realised, and this is what got me interested in the history of modernism.
Right.
It existed there, of course, in early surreal paintings. I mean, Dali is an obvious example of somebody who made things that are normally hard and geometric into something soft.
Undulating.
Watches. Another, it's called biomorphic surrealism. And people like E. Tungy made paintings with fluid sort of shapes to them.
Yeah.
Something as if it's half melted.
Yeah.
This was my exploration of gestural painting slowed down to such an extent that it was
So
creeping.
what's interesting in this is actually purely also from a formal perspective, but historically, is that it is a gradual. Went from gesture to these things to these paintings that limited gesture, but still had a gestural element to them. And even the one that we do have here in the show, at the bottom of the room on the right, has still some dribbling.
Yeah.
Still these soft edges, edges that are not perfectly geometrical.
Yes.
And then the more you went on, the more defined it became, although not exactly defined. From back there, you might think that this is precise, but if you come closer, you would see that actually the boundary is not perfect. It's not absolutely geometric. If you go upstairs in the 80s and then in the 90s and in the 2000s, the boundaries become absolutely perfect. So what's interesting is that this slowness allowed you to also be gradual in your approach. And so how much of that is method and intention, and how much is that just the natural evolution of doing it?
Nothing in my work is without intention.
Exactly.
And those edges you described, I had people come to us and they said, "Hank, you let the paint creep onto the tape here, you've made a mistake." I said, "What do you mean a mistake? It's my painting, I know what's there, and that's the way I want it." What it does is it softens the edges a little, and the rules are made by the artist who makes the painting, not by somebody who thinks, looking at the painting, I know the rules here and this one has deviated. After all, I like playing with that. I like the idea that there appears to be a system, but then it goes wrong. Or it has some small detail in it that perverts the system that appears to be there. I like being perverse. I like undermining the status quo in a way. So you can establish a system and you can make the painting deviate from.
Go outside of it.
Yes.
Yeah, and what it seems to me is that has allowed you to also exist at this kind of intersection or blurred sort of boundary between what is known as hard edge painting, which was another American thing, and a more naturalistic, also an American term, color field approach, but not exactly within one or within the other. You very much charted your own way, which allowed you to be very unique and not identify with either camp, which normally in art should be seen as a virtue. Of course, today, in this brand obsessed world, people want to be identified with one trademark, one movement. Even people that are totally outside of movements, but they yearn to be part of arte povera or whatever. Whereas you very boldly and very originally straddle like your own path.
I did, and
charted your own path.
And I spent 2 more wonderful years in America, but I didn't want to make American style painting, which some British artists ended up doing. But that was an anathema to me and seemed really fake to do that. I'm not American, I'm not part of that really, but I dipped into it for a few years and learned a lot from it.
How many years effectively? And you also taught there, Cooper Union, which is a super important school for the community there. Yeah. So what was your roughly the timeline? How many years did you spend there in the 60s, and then when did you go back?
The longest period of time was in the middle of the 60s for 2.5 years. And then I went back regularly because I had a second exhibition and kept in touch with people that I knew, and it was Dorrie Ashton, who was a very wonderful writer on art, who invited me to teach at Cooper Union, and she's written some very seminal books about people like Philip Gaston and so on, and even the earlier artists. Grafton was one of the New York school and shocked everyone by turning around and doing something entirely different. I remember watching that strange evolution that he went through. And I met him and didn't kind of hit it off with him either. I questioned him about it.
I love this idea. This British boy who went there and like made few friends and like didn't get along with many.
He sent you a poster of his work with love.
He did. He sent me a very warm, charming note a little after that. But he was talking to students from Cooper Union, and I was there as one of the tutors. And nobody seemed to ask him any questions, so I piped up with one, but he didn't like it. I didn't mean to insult him, but I wanted to know whether he felt informed in his new work by earlier work, and he'd been savagely attacked for changing from making abstract expressionist works to then turning to make those figurative works that he's most famous for now.
Cool Klux Klan hats and
Yeah.
it might have had something to do with
The pivotal show was at the Jewish Museum.
yeah, of course.
They were all black paintings.
Yeah.
And a lot of people went expecting to see the kind of work that he'd done previously.
Yeah,
And I think the black ones were precursors.
quite sensational. Yeah.
So just to, for a last,
Take the cough, sweet toast.
Oh.
I haven't got an infectious cough. It's just-
no, and I don't think
I'm
you
talking more
worry.
than I usually do.
Well, I mean, with you, I think we just want to read prompts and then listen as much as we can. But we'll probably go more into more recent times in a bit. But I wanted to ask one last question about the 1960s, at least on my side. And then, those years that you spent there, those 2.5 years, came at a time that was really pivotal because
The what?
the 1960s,
Yes.
mid-60s,
Yes.
which are the years that you spent
Yes.
in New York, were pivotal in a larger sense, apart from for your own practice, but also because effectively abstract expressionists have become a bit tired. It had become almost baroque. It's been 20 years of a movement. Nothing lasts that long. Yeah, exactly. From 45 to 65, it was like sort of starting to fold onto itself. Some people exited it by doing total changes like Philip Guston, like you said, but mostly younger generations started to emerge.
They're all dead now. aren't they?
Now they're all dead, for sure. But at the time,
So they're old masters.
they're all masters. But at the time, younger generations emerged and kind of refused because there had already been a second generation like Sam Francis, Paul Jenkins, etc. But others, like Donald Judd, said, okay, we can't keep doing this. This is baroque at this point. We need to go back to basic shapes, colors, etc. That's when Judd started writing those things, and Carl Andre and everyone else, all the wit, started experimenting with this geometry. So did you, apart from Josef Albers that we mentioned at the beginning and the interaction of color and that kind of research, did you also feel some proximity or commonality or influence with these younger generation of Americans that were not the ones that you revered like Mabel and hang out with, but were your age and were starting to brew these very revolutionary ideas at the time?
Got several comments coming out of that.
Yeah.
First of all, a terrible mistake I made, I think. In that I continued my friendship with that older generation of artists, they would order them in. I found them fascinating. I loved their work. And I kind of neglected meeting artists of my own age. I feel I should have been more sociable and more outward-going and engaged with what was going on amongst artists in their 20s and 30s instead of those in their 60s and 70s. The other thing is, by the time the minimalist artists were emerging and showing a strong voice in the galleries and in the exhibitions in America, I was back in England then, and it was at a distance from me. And it was only in retrospect I really looked at their work and realised how much affinity my work then had acquired with the minimalist artists. I went through several periods of painting that explored other ideas that I don't think were, I didn't notice them being commonplace in American art.
Yeah. Well, here there was also more of an affinity, and in Europe in general, with what we call optical. So most of the geometric abstraction that have to do with perception, which you also, in a way, do, because here there is a lot of research on color, on the way the colors interact. So all that idea that came down or up from the Bauhaus, and that shaped the European way of abstraction has been also the English one, to one extent, I suppose. But again, perhaps your breathing that New York air also brought you closer, although perhaps unknowingly, to that minimalist.
Maybe, yes.
Yeah.
But what's interesting, when I think about modernism, I always think about research into new types of pictorial space. How to create new types of the futurists, use dynamism, Weybridge-like images, Severini, etc. And in your work, I see a very kind of, how shall I say, an original approach to pictorial space, because there's a lot of ambiguity in what you do. Like, for example, here, when I'm looking at this, it's of course, literally a flat painting, but it implies a space. And so you're constantly flipping back and forth between looking at it in a three-dimensional way and then again in a two-dimensional way. And I see that as a very unique kind of research that you started and refined.
Yes, there are many things like that. And what we didn't mention, just looking back at the fluid paintings, is the way the shapes behave in relation to the canvas itself. There are times when the edge of the canvas has a definite influence on the way, and I use that word intentionally, behaviour, because I feel that the shapes that I was making in those paintings were behaving or not behaving.
Right.
Another big change in my work came later, which may lead us on to going upstairs, thinking about what's upstairs. But my perversity in what I wanted to do came to the fore when I realised towards the end of my period in New York that the great leading artists there at the time made what I thought invented the word for myself, and I called the works monocentric. They had tended to have one thing in them. You would say, well, hang on, Pollock hasn't got one thing in it. It's a big tangle of marks and colours, variations of direction of streaks and so on, but nevertheless, the mass itself was a central...
It was a cloud, like a
and then you look at Rothko to clouds using that.
Yeah.
Similarly, again, Barney Newman, one thing. So many.
Gottlieb. Yeah.
Every one of them seemed to have hewn out for themselves a trademark that was based on a bit like a logo, one thing. And it was towards the end of my time there that I thought, I want to split them in half. I want to separate something in the canvas so that there's one thing here and one thing there, and they've got to sort it out between the two, or I should say, the viewer has to sort it out,
Right.
not the artist or the painting itself. And I discovered all sorts of similes in relation to this and explored them. It's been written about, I think, several times, but I was intrigued to see the Bunraku Japanese puppet theatre, and it wasn't that influenced me, although I did go to performances of it, and this often happens as an artist, that you see something external to your work that suggests something about what you're doing in your work. It's as if it gives you permission to be doing what you're...
Validation.
Validation, yes. And the reason is that the Bunraku puppet theatre is a very extravagant form of theatre, because each character in the plot, in the play, needs about 4 or 5 human beings, which is rather more expensive than I mentioned than having one actor.
Yeah, that's right.
However much you pay them. So what you have to have, you have these magnificent 3/4 scale
the one side, and then
puppets
you go
that need to
bring
be
back the
manipulated
gesture,
by people
curve
hiding
form.
behind
You
them,
think about
covered in a
constructivism,
black,
think
black
about
cloak,
Picasso,
like a Ku
think
Klux
about
Klan.
the
Then got
create
the
this
ends of the arms and
interaction
hands
of shapes. So not only
on the
you
stick
create
and
two
they're moving,
centers,
they're moving.
but also two
Hugely
centers with
skilled
very different
operators.
nature.
Then you have a script and
So what made you
language
want to do that?
being spoken.
I've described
But
that.
that's spoken by actors, not on the
No,
stage,
that,
just
yes,
on the side.
but then the different influences is to even break it up
Not looking
in
like actors, but with a script in front of them, and they perform what's written in the script. And you, as the audience, are supposed to ignore the puppeteers and imagine the puppets of the characters, and that they're speaking the voices that someone over there is speaking. And I was rather intrigued by that idea of trying to imbue my paintings with that sort of approach, that make the audience work a bit and bring the various parts of the painting together.
Interesting. So this is the earliest evidence of interactive art we can think of. Now we do it with AI. But, you did it, but
Also, what's very interesting in these big paintings that you have seen upstairs, what you will see, is that you mix, in a sense, the geometric, pure hard edge at that point, abstraction on the one side, and then you bring back the gesture, the curved form, you think about constructivism, you think about Picasso, you think about Delaunay, and you create this interaction of shapes. So not only you create two centers, but also two centers with very different nature. They talk to each other so beautifully. So what made you want to do that as well?
I've described that because I wanted to break up this mono.
No, that, yes,
kind of
but
painting.
then the different influences is to even break it up even more, let's say.
Artworks today.
Well, another
It's one or the other.
phase,
Sometimes
a series of paintings I went through prior to that, which was key to my divided, let's call them the divided painting, because many of them had a central division, almost dead on the centre at some points, or slightly off centre, where there was a dialogue between the two halves. But before that, I did a series of paintings that were all in near to monochrome greys. And I lighted those
very key to that.
The shadows
on
of
on
the
to the explore modernism. I felt that there do many artists
Savigno, his brother.
in our modern times, in our contemporary times, who have explored work of the past, made reference
Which
to
I love that
analysis
series. We
of-
don't have an example here,
Being much
but it's a
Me too.
fantastic.
real
And then there's
inquiry into
work of Picasso.
earliest paintings of the 20th century, and I very quickly realised that
They played with.
Key to the
It's
20th century
famously said that
was
Picasso
Cubism and
used
Surrealism.
abstract
They were
art.
threads that run
Wanted to make
right
that
through the 20th century, and to a certain extent, the ghost of them remains.
Well, yeah, I mean, I suppose Cubism was still clung on to figuration in that it was
Interesting
more about if I
combinations
could.
of the two.
I know when I look at you, I know what the back of your head looks like as well as the front. So I'm just going to basically pull it out on one picture plane. So you have a simultaneous view, which was again.
Kind of interpreting them in a very
It was much more
stripped
aligned
down way,
Yeah.
so that you
Yeah.
hardly recognise where the origins were, but they are
But
there.
they're there, you can feel them, which is very
I enjoy very
Not
much
just the
the
French artists,
Yeah.
costumes that were made at that time.
Curated,
Yeah.
Italian artist was very good at
the
that.
shadows of the Chirico,
Yes.
you know, somehow, yeah.
Pyramids of
A great deal of play
geometric
with
forms.
Right, right.
idea of
Savigno, his brother, did a few of those compositions, the Curated
the
stuff,
relationship or
toys piled up, as you said, which I love that series. We don't have an example here, unfortunately, but it's a fantastic.
And
It's,
then
picture, yes, but
obviously
also
Braque and Picasso,
costumes in
Cubist work.
ballet.
Yeah.
Ballet mécanique.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
They,
Right. Well, Metropolis, you know, man is machine.
it's famously said that Picasso hated abstract art and
There
never
was, there was also
wanted
a
to
lot
make
of
an abstract painting. But
scientific research into the behaviour of insects.
Well, yeah, I mean, I suppose Cubism was still clung on to figuration in that it was more about if I could, I know when I look at you, I know what the back of your head looks like as well as the front, so I'm just going to basically pull it out on one picture plane. So you have a simultaneous view, which was again a very new type of space. And then you also have the synthetic cubism, which was, I would say, was much more aligned to, you know, what you.
But they had humor in it.
Totally.
Some of them are hilarious.
No, they're all full of
I
irony.
enjoy very much
These books on
Yes, sir.
you can
Yeah.
costumes that were made at that time.
Amazing, yeah, amazing.
There was a period during the early 20th century when a great deal of play with the idea of the relationship or
Familiar.
You were looking at European culture with your reference with French, etc. And I think what we need to also bear in mind is that you were able to be so experimental and innovative in a country where typically there is a tendency to stick
Metropolis, you know, man
tradition
is machine.
in a certain
Yeah,
sense.
yeah.
I mean, England can be both.
And there was also a lot of scientific research into the behaviour of insects. I was a great fan of a French entomologist who studied, he was one of the first naturalists who studied animals as they live and didn't kill them and put a pin through them and give them a name. But he watched the way bees behaved and ants.
Is this Edmund or Wilson, Richard?
No, this is Farmer.
Ah,
Jean-Henri Farmer.
Yes, yes.
He was just a village school teacher and obviously a brilliant man. He was a mathematician too, but he studied. I think his legacy is his books on the study of insect life. And now I've lost the name, but there was a playwright who wrote a play based on the idea of a human society that was structured like an ant's nest.
Yes, sounds familiar.
You were looking at European culture in your reference with French, etc. And I think what we need to also bear in mind is that you were able to be so experimental and innovative in a country where typically there is a tendency to stick to tradition in a certain sense. I mean, England can be both very disruptive and bring about rock and roll and very new things, but also in painting, for example, they never really embraced abstract expression is more art informel that was happening all over the world, from the US to Japan to Europe to South America, never here. There is this like tendency to stick to figure. So even, you
I
know,
think it's the worst aspect of the British is they're very conservative, especially generally within the visual arts. I mean, I think the taste and the enthusiasm and the analysis of music and literature are far more forceful in Britain than the visual arts.
Yeah, I mean, I remember bringing a show of Jean-Michel Basquiat to the British Art Fair in 1985, and Valdemar Januzak gave me the worst review I've ever had in my entire life. And later in 2017, when I did the Basquiat show at the Barbican, he lauded it. We had this huge article in the Times. So how have you, I mean, because you're the teacher of, I was fascinated to know, because I saw Jake Chapman the other night, I saw Tracy Emin, and they all said, oh, he was my teacher. I mean, how?
Half of them are here, so.
That was the way we done it.
Can we have a show of that?
yes, Nigel.
Show of hands. Oh, great. How do you feel you've influenced those?
I think I influenced them in the slightest.
In the slightest.
No, I can't claim that. I mean, if I did anything of benefit, I think it was somehow I orchestrated things a bit in the background to try to help all these really talented students to evolve in the direction they chose, and not to influence them.
To cultivate.
I hated the idea that any of them might paint like me.
Yeah.
That was,
Well, that's not a really good teacher. That's back to Greenberg again. Cropping.
I got kidded about that.
Did you?
I had friends of mine, colleagues who did some teaching in other colleges. They come to a show of all college students where you say, oh, I can see your influence here, sarcastically.
Oh, I see, yeah.
Did you see the approach of the YBA? It's interesting how in this country often things are defined by generation rather than other aspects. You were the new generation in your years,
Yeah,
and in the early 90s there was
dodgy calling something new, isn't it?
exactly. And then these ones were the young British artists, which now they're 60, we're still calling them young British artists, which is kind of funny, but it's okay. So how did you see that come as a tide when you were still teaching at the time? At the Royal College, and then you were involved with the Royal Academy. How did that come about? Did you feel there was an ebullience of ideas and
I
characters?
was so lucky because I was quite early on in my academic career. I got working at Royal College of Art, which is an entirely postgraduate college, or likes to call itself a university, because it has many disciplines under one roof, all of them students working as postgraduates at a postgraduate level. And so they're pretty sophisticated and knowledgeable by the time they came to us at the college. And they're the most enjoyable people to have conversations with, not easily influenced, and one wouldn't necessarily want them to be. I don't know, it's up to them to tell you, I don't know.
Well, the Royal College has been named for now, I don't know how many years in a row, the #1 art and architecture school in the world. So that must have been a pretty incredible place to spend so many years.
Yes, and the professors heading up other specialisms were wonderful people, and head of architecture, fashion, and illustration, all sorts of wonderful subjects being taught by high professionals. But the sad thing is there's so much politics in places like that, usually bickering over the lack of money and space, and so sadly I spent a lot of my time at the college in meetings, arguing and trying to do my best to protect. We used to call them schools. Mine was a school of painting, trying to protect it and not have it eroded and dismantled by the powers that be. It was a tough time, and the only saving grace for the wonderful students and artists as they became also working there. If it wasn't for them, I would have left after the first year or two.
Yeah. I think this is a beautiful note upon which to perhaps open the floor to questions.
I was going to say the same thing. Yeah. Anyone have questions? Questions?
Hello.
I wanted to ask you, how did the fact that you started teaching, how did that impact your own art creation?
Well, they always say if you want to learn more about something, you should try teaching it. And so many teachers famously keep sort of one chapter ahead of their students and rush home and read up the subject at home before they have to go in the next day and give a lecture. So that's a sort of given. But of course it was a financial thing initially. It was a way of having something of a regular income, but still working within the realm of the subject that you enjoy most. And what better life for an artist who needs to make a bit of extra money is to go and talk to other artists about it, whether they're fellow teachers or intelligent students who've got all kinds of things to teach you. So, great benefit and a great way of getting by. Trouble is, if you're too good at it, you get kicked upstairs and you get prevented from spending your days torturing. That's a Freudian slip.
Yeah, you become a manager, don't you? Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
These paintings, they feel incredibly fresh and relevant. I have so many questions. It's great to hear somebody talking the way you do about painting again. But it does strike me that there's something that's remained consistent with your work, which is your sense of mischief.
I'm glad you spotted it. Not everyone does spot it.
But just looking at the paintings again, do you feel that that's something that's stayed with you throughout your career? That makes these feel
I hope so.
as relevant as
I hope so, yes. It's generous of you to spot that, because some people think that they've just got things wrong with them or something.
Or that you are a very serious abstractionist, very rigorous, and then there is that little bit mischief.
And a lot of my paintings are very big, as you can see from this thing here, but I think even so, a little square inch in the corner somewhere is as important, if not more so, than a huge meter spread of one consistent colour. The focus gets down to the minutest nuances along the edge of shapes and the corners of the canvas and so on, which I feel is so important. I mean, what's the point in doing huge canvases if there aren't details in it that matter?
It's the culture of seeing, really. It's like things like this teach us to see. This is what's so important, that in a world where we are overwhelmed with imagery and bombarded with information, looking at the detail of something like this, even on this large scale, and especially on the large scale, it's a way to learn how to see, which is so important, and to discern things.
Anyone else?
Oh, we had someone here before, who had in front.
This gentleman here, in the grey jumper.
Well,
Did you-
no, he's done it already.
Yeah.
But there is a lady here who has her.
Okay, take the question at the back.
Okay, the man in the hat.
There are many questions.
Yeah.
Hello, Paul. What is your favorite color?
that's
said, what's your favorite color?
You're not serious, are you?
Okay.
Sorry, I was getting
He's totally serious.
It's relevant. It's a matter of context, isn't it? I mean, what you're going to say? Look, he paints orange painting. He must have orange. I wouldn't want an orange cup of tea. A cup of tea has to be a particular colour. If I cut a slice of beef, I'm interested in the colour of it.
Green.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question. You haven't mentioned colour at all. I think colour is so important and you're taking off from the person like that. So maybe you could just talk us through how you work with colour, because I think that's really important.
It would be a long answer. There's so many colour theories about, and I don't like theories. And I went to a very useful summer school conducted by Victor Passmore and Harry Thubron and Maurice de Sumeras. You might not know all those names, but the subject of that, I think it was 3 weeks long or something, in the middle of the summer, was colour. And I benefited enormously from that because although it was kind of loosely based on the methodology of the Bauhaus teaching, it wasn't teaching a theory. It was teaching about colour pragmatically, about just using it and learning what happened when you did use it. And certain, I wouldn't say theories at all, but certain systems came out of it that you could recognise. And the first thing is, the most important thing is, that you can make a catalogue of colour. And we all know about things like colour wheels and so on, but they matter, I think, because it's a way of assembling everything you know and experience about colour in one system that has it, where each part of it has its place. And if you can hold that concept, an extended version of it is called a colour solid. In other words, you could categorise all known colour or visible colour. That's not counting the ones beyond the spectrum, the visible spectrum. Is possible to locate within a colour solid. And by its nature, it has to be a totally imaginative thing. It can't possibly exist in reality. And I often used to teach young students about this idea, and I used to imply that it was like a huge fruit, like a pumpkin, that you could cut up and inspect the various slices of it and identify where colours belonged. But if you're able to hold something like that in your head, you know what you're doing when you put 4 colours on the canvas. You know how they relate to each other within the solid. I found that helpful. I don't say it matters to other artists.
Yeah.
It mattered to me, and I can't escape that thought process.
That's right.
The thing that I think is fascinating that you do is the fact that you'll take red, typical opposite colours of the spectrum, and you take them, red and green for instance, and you push them, like I don't know any other artist who does it the same way as you do. So if you look at any painting in this whole thing, you'll see how something originates in a red, but it might be a puce pink, and you do pinks better than anyone I know. And a green could become a nice yellowy colour, and you push and you pull the same way that you push your shapes and you're balancing, but the colour really adds to that. And you just have to talk about
To do with what I was describing, you can say, hang on, this relates to that. Different sides of this pumpkin or whatever.
Yeah.
And you push it further.
Colour is completely comparative. I mean, we learned that from Albert.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at Johanna, at School of Visual Arts when I was there, we had to study Oswald, Mansell, Albers, Itten, the whole thing. And you start to realize that color is relational.
Yes.
It's relational. And you're right, Susie. I mean, what he does is incredible. He pushes those relationships to a degree that you see few artists do. It's
I
true.
mean, you pulled a drawer in your studio that you open up.
I got a picture of that, actually.
It's amazing. And you're like a kid with playing with colour. And there'll be just the slightest little shift in one of your colours, and you'll be putting them up and you're changing them hundreds of times before you get the right colour. And you might change it.
Oh, I do what Greenberg does. I close my eyes.
And you crop. This
But
green.
can you imagine popping a
I'm going to think about this now forever.
Susie
Crop it.
said that I have a drawer of colour swatches, and I pick one out. This one I have.
Yeah. No,
Color
of
paper
course.
is the methodology that Albers suggests. Because with paper, you don't have to mix
No,
colors and you
but
don't
it's
get
incredible.
exhausted. You just work and it's all the same and you trade it with other students
Yeah.
and it becomes that whole thing. That's
So
right.
it's incredible though how you can take a color and put it against another color and then take that same color and put it against another and it's totally different.
Can I say, speaking
It
of
depends
colors,
on context.
this is a gallery known, and they do all the major art fairs globally, and they're hugely present within the global art scene, known for their black and white aesthetic. Which is true. I would say one of the great successes of this is having brought so much crazy.
I don't know how, I'm working 8 years here, with black and white, beige paintings, And so it's so nice to have this
Versus clash. Yeah. After all these years, we had to break it up.
Any other
I have
questions?
one more question. Yeah, that Susie's asked the question I was going to ask.
Oh, great, perfect.
Paul, will you indulge me, because you're in the room and this thing was here, I want you to, I'm going to move on, but there's a bit that I'd love you to talk about. Can you can you talk about that? Please.
I wish we could move the camera so that it.
That's the mischief, isn't it?
Yeah. That's your mischief, isn't it?
What do you think?
No. I'm going to hear you. I think it's fantastically disruptive, and it takes us by, we think we know what we're looking at, and then there's something else. Our assumptions are dashed
That
in a really
little-
exciting way.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But
Corner, that little tip.
In the lovely book that Jeremy Lewison wrote, which I think it's wonderful, but I shouldn't think many artists can be as pleased as I am without a monograph with my work. He actually does analyse either this painting or one very similar to it, and describes quite well what he thinks it's doing. And he's pointing out how that central dark shape appears to suggest an illusion of something solid, like a block standing in space. But then when you get a fractional overlap of an adjacent colour, it divides that and says, no, it's not that at all. You thought you were looking at that, and now it's flat after all, like the rest of the painting. It's all flat after all. And that's
But that's the
one of the
suspension
great,
element.
one of the great beauties of painting is, of course, how it can play with space. And it can, for many hundreds and thousands of years, the game was to make an illusion of space. It was like the space we live in, but then other artists came along and tried to do other things with it.
Great question. That's great.
Thank you.
Someone in front here who had a question.
I've asked Paul a lot of questions because I did a very, very long recording with Paul for the British Library.
And it took about 2 years.
4 years.
How many?
But what I wanted to ask you was, we've had a little glimpse tonight into your incredible trajectory. You met all these sort of legendary, iconic figures along the way, artists, and I think you also have enjoyed, a huge number of incredibly important friendships with artists. And I can remember stories you told me about conversations you had with Jasper Johns about the edges of, you know, of a painting and this sort of thing. So I suppose I was wondering whose opinion matters to you? And looking back, have there been particular sort of interactions with other artists that you've respected that sort of have stayed with you?
Wow, that's a goodie. You've stumped me because there are so many artists whose work I admire. I don't know, and some I do know. I think you might be probing for me to repeat something I might have said in one of your recordings.
Share it with everybody, Paul.
I think Hester was on the same subject, trying to probe and ask me what motivated me to push on and do another work. And I said something that I should have kept secret, but now it's not. I said I'd try and make a painting that will annoy John Hoyland the most. John's sadly no longer with us, and he was a great friend from my student days. And things turned sour because I discovered things about him that were kept from me. And Hester here did a marvellous lecture called Frenemies, and she used me as a model of an exemplar of that state of being both an enemy and a friend of somebody. But there's nothing wrong with having a rifle, and it can be a big boost.
It's healthy, and something that happened at the time, no longer really.
I'm Sicilian, so I know all about it.
I think Joe will have to probably...
Exactly. Well, anyway, thanks everyone
Thank
for
you.
coming.